guys, what's up? I'm Dusty Smith, and this is the Cult of Dusty. You know, I was listening to the radio the other day, and there was two guys, and they were debating over the Fort Hood shooting. You know, where that Muslim guy stood up and he gunned down his fellow soldiers at Fort Hood. And anyway, these two guys on the radio, what the argument was about was over whether all Muslims should be banned from the military altogether. And one guy was a preacher, and his position was, yes, of course, all Muslims should be banned from the military immediately. And the other guy was a little bit more sensible, but he was still kind of an idiot because he didn't really make very good arguments for his side. But anyway, this other guy was doing the best job he could, and his position was that all Muslims should not be removed from the military instantly. And so the first thing the Christian preacher said was, he pointed out a verse in the Quran that basically said that they're supposed to kill infidels. It was only one single verse, and he was using this to prove that the Quran is an evil book and anybody who follows it cannot be trusted to be in the military. And then the other guy, the more sensible guy, he came back with a few Bible verses that were much, much, much worse than what the Quran said. I mean, the Bible is just really awful compared to the Quran. But the verses he brought up were in the Old Testament. And so the preacher immediately starts trying to distance himself from the Old Testament. And he said something really retarded that the guy didn't even call him on. He said, I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. If you want to talk about the Old Testament, you're going to have to talk to a Jewish scholar about that. I'm a Christian. And the guy didn't call him on or anything. The guy just completely let it go. But I was thinking, oh my God, what a goddamn load of bullshit. And I've noticed that Christians try to do this so fucking much. When you bring up how evil and retarded the Old Testament is, they immediately try to distance themselves from the Old Testament. They try to claim that the Old Testament doesn't even count anymore. But at the exact same time, these exact same motherfuckers will bring up things like, you know, homosexuality, which is found in the Old Testament. They'll bring up the Ten Commandments, which is found in the Old Testament. The preachers would tell them they need to tithe, you know, give 10% of their earnings, which is found in the Old Testament. So when they want to use the Old Testament, it's fine. And if you go to any fucking church in America today, you will most likely hear preaching from the Old Testament. It's not like Christians don't teach out of the Old Testament. In fact, the majority of the Bible is the Old Testament. If they were to get rid of the Old Testament, they would be getting rid of the majority of their holy book. And of course, they're not going to do this. Every fucking church teaches out of the Old Testament. So pretending like the Old Testament doesn't count anymore, it's so fucking cowardly. We see right through that bullshit when you do it. We're not fucking idiots. When you talk to atheists, you're not goddamn talking to idiots. You're talking to people who can see right through your goddamn lies and bullshit. You're doing it because you know that the Old Testament is awful. You're doing it because you know that the Old Testament supports slavery and genocide and child sacrifice and evil shit. You're doing it because you know that the Old Testament is much worse than any fucking thing the Quran has in it. It's much more about bloodshed and killing people and getting revenge and evil than the Quran ever thought about being. And you know that. You know it's true. And that's exactly why when anybody ever brings up the Old Testament, you try so hard to distance yourself from it. So let me ask you Christians an honest question. Who in the fuck do you think that you're fooling? Because it's not us. Us atheists know exactly what the fuck you're doing. We know exactly why you're distancing yourself from the Bible. We've read it. We've read the Bible. We understand exactly why you're embarrassed of it. We just want you to admit it to yourself. The sooner you Christians admit it to yourself, why you're so embarrassed by the Old Testament, the sooner that we can move on as a society and evolve to the next level. Hurry the fuck up already. For the CultOfDusty.com, I am Dusty Smith, and as always, until next time, logic.